To introduce myself, I'm Danielle Kashubi, Danny Kashubi with the Institute for Bird Populations. I'm also the president of WBBA, and I would like to thank you for coming and welcome you to this presentation. Cyndi Smith will be starting us off this evening. Cyndi is a board member with the WBBA, but beyond WBBA, Cyndi started and still operates 2 map stations in Banff National Park. She's run those since 1999, and in Waterton Lakes National Park since 2002. She's committed to publishing and has authored over or co-authored over 20 peer-reviewed publications, half of which are from her research on Harlequin ducks, which she has studied since 1995. Cyndi has volunteered on various bird monitoring and banding projects in Alberta, as well as in Montana, France, Costa Rica, Mexico, Ecuador, and Belize. And she has been on the board of the Calgary Bird Banding Society since 2014 and vice president since 2016. She's currently co-chair of the steering committee of the Canadian Migration Monitoring Network and a member of the scientific subcommittee. And she's been a member of WBBA since 2004. So we look forward to her talk on Harlequin ducks. And Cyndi, it's all yours.
Okay, see if I can do it as successfully as I did the first time.
When there's pressure.
When there's pressure. Back one. Okay, is that working, Danny?
That looks great, and I can hear you fine, so you're good to go.
Okay. So as Danny said, I've been working with Harlequin ducks for nearly 30 years now, and just a little refresher for those that might not know this fantastic bird. They are a small sea duck that breeds in fast-flowing mountain streams in Western North America, in Quebec and Labrador in Eastern North America, and in Greenland and Iceland. Now they have, as with a lot of most of the sea ducks, they have delayed sexual maturity, not usually breeding until they're 3 or 4 or more years old, low annual productivity, high adult survival, strong site fidelity to breeding streams and to non-breeding areas. So they're returning to where they've hatched. And they depend on streams and coastal areas with healthy macroinvertebrate populations. So they are a pretty good indicator of these types of ecosystems. As you can imagine, capturing them can be a challenge in these harsh environments, and that's the first thing I'm going to talk about is how the heck do we catch them? One of the easiest ways is during the flight feather molt. As with all waterfowl, they're flightless for a few weeks. The males in July and the females in late August and September. And this is on just off the east side of Vancouver Island. And we were setting up a drive trap at low tide, and then using a kayaks, you would slowly move the birds along the shoreline so that they came into this through a wing that forces them to enter the trap. We also used decoys to kind of keep them interested in the site, and that's Ian Gowdy, who was a researcher at the time with Canadian Wildlife Service and helped me get started, and a lot of other people in Harlequin duck research. And you can catch a lot of birds. The first drive trap we did, we caught 200 Harlequin ducks, and takes quite a while to handle them. They're all put into, you can put 2 or 3 in these mesh bags, take them to shore, you cover them with towels, keep the towels wet so the birds are keeping their temperature properly, and then we had multiple banders working on banding these birds. And another way, though, at the time of year when all the birds can fly, is to use a floating mist net. And these, I think, maybe started to be used with capturing marbled murrelets and other seabirds, and we started using it for sea ducks. So this is in March on near Hornby Island, where Harlequin ducks and many other species concentrate during the herring spawn. So you set up one of the ends of one of the poles is set up just attached to shore. The other one is stretched further out and anchored, and then you run the mist net in between. And then you have to use a boat. Of course, the birds can fly, so there's no guarantee that you're going to get the birds to move the direction you want towards the net. So it's definitely a bit more chancy. But to help again, we use decoys. Now there's 3 Harlequin ducks in this picture, and maybe you can spot the one that's a real duck compared to the two that are decoys, and that's the real one. Unfortunately, there's no Harlequin duck size decoys, so we were using mallard ones, and mallards are considerably larger than Harlequins, of course. Now, when we first started on the Bow River in Banff National Park in 1995, Ian brought out this large gill net, basically, but instead of putting it underwater, we were spreading it across the stream, 100 meters long, 4 meters high, 120 millimeter diagonal mesh. And we didn't know exactly when the birds would be arriving, so we set this up in late April. We were shoveling snow to get the net set up. But really, once it's set up, it disappears against the background. You can just kind of see a bit of the fold of the net here. One of the critical things is setting up where there's like a corner in the river or at the top or bottom of a rapid where the birds will be having to fly for sure to get around that obstacle. And if you have it on a corner, then the mist net can also be hidden. Kind of it disappears into the foliage of the trees. And for those that know the Bow River, this is Mount Temple near Lake Louise. But we soon realized that it was much more efficient to go to where the ducks were on the river. So we started using these 18-meter long nets, 12 meters on small streams, only 3 meters high, 5 panels, 100 millimeter diagonal mesh. And then we would, back up one, and then we would go and find birds along the river, choose a spot usually upstream of them so that we could move the birds upstream so they'd be more likely to be flying when they approach the net rather than swimming. But with young ones, we would set it so that of course they're not flying. We would try to catch them at class 3, which is basically they're fledged, but they're not capable flyers yet. They're not real keen to start flying. So they're usually swimming with the female. And so you have to have it so that the bottom trammel line is actually in the water. So we would fill mesh bags with rocks and then use a carabiner to clip that to the bottom of the line. Now, of course, I always stayed right at the net, kind of crouched down, because as soon as the birds went in, we had to go out and lift that up so that they weren't going to drown in that net. We always had somebody or more than one person at the net to be able to prevent that from happening. And then we discovered too, when we released the ducks, that the mother, of course, the hen can fly, so she'd often take off and disappear. So we started releasing the hen just a little bit, a few seconds after we've released the young ones, and then she's more certain to know that those are her young ones there. She'll still fly off, but she'll return to get them. And so we never had a problem with separation of a brood. And then we, on the advice of colleagues in Quebec and Labrador who were working on some big canyons and streams, how do you do this when you can't walk across the stream to put up the net? And here, and I'll show a video of this in just a minute, but you can see the kayaker upstream here to moving the birds towards the net. And then we've captured the birds here. So we did write this up in Wildlife Society Bulletin. So I'm going to play a little video now that was, so this was down on McDonald Creek in Glacier National Park in Montana. I worked in Waterton Lakes National Park, which was for many years, which is part of the Waterton Glacier International Peace Park, and helped with some studies down in Glacier. So let's, hopefully this works. This was often the most dangerous part of the day, was making sure people got safely across the river in the kayak. So here the net is being pulled to the far side, one end of the net. So again, you can see where we've chosen a site that was on a bend in the river, so it's going to be more of a surprise. And Harlequin ducks almost always fly really following tight to the river channel, maybe a meter above the river. If you notice where I'm positioned here, I'm holding those bottom two trammel lines to pull them down just above the water when the ducks come to the net. If we pull them down too soon, the waves in the river catch them and they're bouncing and the birds will see the net. So that Lisa is holding the pole, and I'm going to be moving those trammel lines down as soon as I see well, at the time where I think I can do it at the last second before the birds come to the net. Two mergansers flew over. So the critical thing is to get enough height so that you can hold the birds up out of the water and the tension at the same time. Meanwhile, the guys on the far side are getting those loops off the pole so that they can let us pull the net across the river. It helps to have long arms. Anyway, the other thing too is I've timed that, and it only took 1 minute from the time the birds hit the net until we had them on the side where we could hold on to them, and that wasn't edited down footage or anything. So once we have the birds in hand, we mark them not only with the standard metal band, but also with a two-letter plastic uniquely coded band. And so the ones I was using was a white code on a red background, because the Harlequin ducks are kind of unique amongst a lot of the waterfowl, because after foraging, they will haul out on rocks or on shore or on logs to preen and rest. And at that time, you can use a spotting scope and you can read that band, and often from like maybe 200 meters away. So it's really quite a good way to do a mark recapture without having to recapture the birds. Now, more recently, well, even in the 90s, we used some VHF and satellite radios. This female has what's called a prong and suture attachment for a VHF radio, so that's only good within a kilometer or two at the most, depending on the topography. With males, we've used an intra-abdominal implant of a satellite transmitter. And of course, a veterinarian does that. The bird is anesthetized. But it's quite a large transmitter, so it's only the males that we've generally used that on, because they can carry that extra weight. And then also people have been using the geolocators that can give latitudinal information. So with this, between the leg bands and now this more recent telemetry, we've been able to do some really interesting connections between breeding and non-breeding areas. So here's the breeding streams where we had captured birds, And then this is the band resightings, and we were seeing them, all along Vancouver Island, the Salish Sea, along the Olympic Peninsula here. But as far away as the Queen Charlotte Islands, now called Haida Gwaii, and up into Alaska as well. So we kind of think, well, this is an extremely important area for the birds for molting and wintering, but maybe that's just because we have no one up in this area reading bands. It's just about impossible to read a leg band up in that area. But the satellite telemetry has then shown that a lot of these birds do spread further afield up the coast. So the circles are the molting locations, and the squares are where these birds were originally banded. So you see, yes, there's still a lot of activity in the Salish Sea, but all the way up the coast, wherever there's good habitat, there's Harlequin ducks. But the Salish Sea is extremely important. The area around Hornby Island is where there's still a very healthy herring spawn most years, and we've counted up to 4,000 Harlequin ducks there, feeding on herring eggs and pair bonding, and as well as thousands and thousands of other waterfowl. So it is still a very important area. One of the other things, though, the satellite telemetry has helped us understand is the area where the males or where these birds molt is not necessarily where they're going to winter. So by having a satellite transmitter, we've seen that sometimes they've gone to Haida Gwaii, they've molted, and they've moved back to the mainland, almost to Vancouver Island, to spend the winter. And if you think about it, the male leaves the breeding stream in June, late June, at the latest generally, but the female doesn't join the male until or go to the coast until August or September, and yet they find each other again and have long-term pair bonds. And so we're thinking that probably happens at the molting area or the wintering area, but we're not completely sure, and it could be a mixture of both. Let's see here. So the band and the band resightings have confirmed this pair bond that is long-term and generally not broken unless a bird, one of the birds dies. We've also shown through band resightings that females lead the brood to the coast, which is unusual in most of the ducks. It's more common in geese and swans. And this is a brood on the river, and this is the female here. It's a little hard to tell in this photo, but she's got a little bit darker pattern, a little duskier in the face. And if she was standing too, the young ones have quite yellowish legs, and the female adult has grayish legs. And then we were able to, through banding, show that the young birds get their full adult plumage at the end of their second year. And so you have a young male on the right. Of course, with females, it's very difficult to tell the difference by plumage and age. And they don't, as I mentioned before, they don't go to the breeding streams until they're 3 or 4 years old. And then the female returns to her natal breeding stream, and then the male follows. So that's sort of allows a lot of that genetic mixing to happen. We also, in aging them, we use the Bursa fabricius, which is basically a sac. It's involved in immunosuppression, and there's depth to it in the younger birds, and as the bird ages, it disappears, it gets resorbed. So you can age birds up to about 3 years old, and that's most useful with the females. We look at the tarsus bone length and exposed culmen length, and these two measurements we've used to help us age sex juvenile ducklings, because sometimes the cloacal protuberance just isn't the penis sheath just isn't very obvious if the bird is quite young. I have had birds that seem to get a sex change when they hit the ocean, where I sexed it as a female and it became a male when you saw it the next time after being banded. And on the Bull River, this is not to do with the banding, but we've been doing a roadside survey on the Bull River since 1995, and you can see the trajectory here is not good. There's a decline of about 3.5% per year. But what's really interesting is what happened here. There seemed to be quite a strong decline starting in about 2006, 2007. And it wasn't just on the Bull River. It was also on the Loxa River in Idaho, Glacier National Park, McDonald Creek, McLeod River up in east of Jasper National Park. So it's really curious what happened there. And then it's that population seems to have stabilized since then at a lower level and maybe showing a little bit of rebound most recently. So this is just sort of a bit of a recap. So, the banded birds have contributed immensely to our knowledge of Harlequin dispersal, migration, behavior, physiology. That's a trajectory of declines. And I should say that was also happening at the coastal breeding areas too, or non-breeding areas. And that there is a working group of Harlequin researchers in Western North America that's trying to submit proposals to get additional research throughout the breeding range in Western North America. And I'd like to acknowledge the various colleagues and volunteers who've helped and co-authors on various papers, and Shelley Humphreys, the aquatic specialist Parks Canada, who has kept this research alive in Banff National Park. And quite a lot of this is written up as a natural history section on the Bow Valley Naturalists website. And I think that's it, Danny.
Thank you so much. Every time I see that video where you're working that net across the stream, I am so impressed with the creativity and the bravery too of the people in the kayaks who have to go across. So that's really cool. So we have some time for some questions. So if you do have a question, you can raise your hand using I don't know if you're familiar with using the little app in here, so I know who to call on, or you can write it in the chats and I can get it from there. Okay, I do have one question for you, Cyndi, from the chat. Was that time frame when there were higher water levels or flooding? I'm assuming them for the video.
McDonald Creek, where that video is filmed, is got quite high water generally. It's fairly narrow. So there weren't very many times that we could actually walk across the river to either set the net or get birds out of it. So on the Bow River, if we're working far enough up the stream, closer to Lake Louise, early May, we can get away with often walking across the river. But yeah, as soon as you start getting warmer temperatures, higher snow melt, then you're having to use this high water set.
Do you want to clarify your question? Go for it, Rinkin.
Yes, hello, Cyndi, hello, Jeff. The question actually pertained to the dramatic drop in populations in the mid 2000s. Shouldn't say mid 2000s. The mid, whatever those years were, 2007 to 2010.
Yeah, the thing we'd like to also look at, the water levels weren't particularly different then, but we don't have good, or we have not delved into what the aquatic invertebrate population was doing at that point, whether there was a drop in invertebrates in the food source there, such that it wasn't supporting as many birds. That's an unknown in our analysis of what happened there. But certainly climate change, high water can, at the wrong season, an early snowmelt, or more likely a rain event, the birds have started nesting. A big rain event can wash the nest right out, because they usually nest within less than a meter from the edge of a river. And of course, with the male leaving shortly after the female starts to incubate, there's no opportunity for re-nesting.
Thanks.
There's another question from the chat. How many Harlequin ducks did you need to catch to feel you had a good sample size for drawing conclusions about the population?
Well, we're not using banded birds as part of this population estimate, so we're using roadside surveys. So we do 5 surveys through the month of May, and then that's what's forming our index of population size. So I think you'd need at least 6 or 7 years to start to get a good handle on that, and we've got close to 30 years now, as does Lisa down in Glacier National Park and over on the Loxa River. They've gone in Idaho, they've gone from something like 20 some pairs of ducks down to 1 or 2 pairs in the last few years. So they've had an even more dramatic drop there. But it's true, sample size is important. We couldn't use, we were trying to look at using the band mark recapture analysis, but it's not really a closed population because they migrate through here. They go to the eastern slopes like the Elbow River or the Kananaskis. They go up neighboring streams. So we're violating the principles of mark recapture analysis.
I have another question, a little different one. So what is the current code you guys use for Harlequin ducks? In your presentation, it's HADU. Do you use that, or do you use HARD these days?
HADU.
Okay. And then another question, are there any significant recaptures that stand out from your 30 years of banding these birds?
Well, yeah, and actually in North American Bird Bander, we published a longevity record for Harlequin ducks, where we had a male that we banded on the Bow River, was resighted, and the band read at Hornby Island, and it was 20 years old. So that was pretty nice, because people were saying, oh, they should be in the 15 to 20 year age range for longevity, but we didn't have that actual data yet. So having those unique codes was important, because the first couple of years that Ian Gowdy was doing it, they just had a colored leg band like you might use on passerines. So there was no code, so you didn't really know where and when the bird was banded by resighting it.
Do you get
that color coding is coordinated by the bird banding lab and the bird banding office, so that there's no overlap between researchers.
Do you get a lot of resights from the public on your leg bands?
Occasionally, yeah. I've had people that have sent in photographs, especially people taking photos. Will determine the band, because it's on both sides of the red of the leg, so it's on there twice. The other thing where we get recoveries is Harlequin ducks are still hunted in at the coastal locations, and so almost annually I get at least one recovery that way, where of the male. Rarely, I think I've only had one female shot. It's males because people want them for the for a trophy mount. And although I think and most of them have been in Washington State, and I believe Washington is just putting in regulations to either really limit it or eliminate hunting of Harlequin ducks.
Well, I understand why you'd want a male one. They're quite stunning little birds. So yeah. All right, and one last chance for one last question, anyone? Okay, Cyndi, thank you so much for doing this talk.